Excellent. Welcome. My name is Mario Sanchez, and I run training here at Sumo Logic. And today I'm going to be walking you through how to become a Sumo Power user. So most of you attended that level 1 certification, which was showing you the Sumo Pro, which is a little bit more focused on showing you what Sumo can do. What we're going to focus on today is deeper analytics and really showing you how to do a lot of these things. So with that said, we're going to go through learning what a unified solution of logs and metrics, so both monitoring and troubleshooting, what does it look like? I'm not going to do the demo again. Most of you saw it last time. But what I really want to deep dive into is this number 2 area, which is a quick review of the basics that we covered in level 1, but start talking about more advanced analytics. And of course, I cannot cover all content in here, but I definitely want to give you a good sense of those tools that you'll be using 80 or 90% of the time. And then we'll talk a little bit about how do you start monitoring your trends and monitoring those critical events. So dashboards and alerts. In particular, I want to talk a little bit more about best practices around these. And then depending on time, I'll point you some peer use cases. I will share both the slides as well as the video for this. So you'll have access to a lot of these use cases. And then number 5 is we'll talk a little bit about what other help is available to you and how to take the certification exam for level 2. Okay, so similar to level 1, there is a training environment. There are hands-on labs that go with this. And this slide shows you how to access those labs. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go access them myself because I will be taking a lot of exercises from that hands-on labs to drive a lot of the points that we're going to be covering today. So let me show you exactly how to do that. In short, you're going to go to your home tab, click on certification, and part of the prep work there is the hands-on lab. So let me just demo that to you because we'll be using that pretty soon. So let me go over here. Here's this is a training instance that you all have access to. When you download the labs, you will get a username and password to be able to access the same exact instance that I'm using in here. But as I mentioned, if you go to home and go to certification, here's all the different certifications available to you. By the way, my colors seem a little off just because it's been cached. Your colors might look a little bit different because they've been updated. But you see, if you notice here, the level 2 certification has 2 things for prep. One is the Sumo Logic webinar, which is exactly what we're doing right now, the webinar you're attending. And the second one is this hands-on lab. So I'm just going to click on it, and you'll notice that what it does is it opens this PDF. This PDF, let me make it a little bit bigger for you, but this PDF has a user and password that you'll be able to use in order to access this same environment that I'm accessing. So these labs start with some of the very basics, and I'm gonna not do the labs themselves, but I'm gonna kind of walk you through briefly a little bit of that. But then I'm also gonna start diving into the more interesting stuff, like some of the parsing options that are available to you. All right, so with that said, let's get started. A quick review of the basics. I know that most of you, if not all of you, just came from level 1 certification, but in case there's a few stragglers out there, 30,000 foot view, I'm not going to go through the monitor and troubleshoot demo, but you guys would remember that we were alerted of some critical event, whether it is that we received a PagerDuty alert or a Slack alert, or we were just looking at our dashboards and saw some reds going on. We're made aware of some critical event going on, right? So we start diving into those dashboards. And if you remember, one of the things that we do is we look at metrics first. Metrics tell us, think of it as the symptoms, the what is happening, what's going on in my environment. In our demo in level 1, the issue was that we were having a lot of failed bookings. Oops, sorry about that. This is going in reverse here. That we were having a lot of failed bookings. So what we had to do is we had to dive into the relevant logs so that we could identify the why. Why is something going on? As we all know, logs are very verbose and they actually tell us a lot of more information. So the idea behind the demo is you're alerted of something, you look at metrics to identify the what, and then you dive into the relevant logs to identify the why something is going on. From a high-level 30,000 foot view, this is how data flows into Sumo. We collect data through collectors and sources. We're not going to cover that today. we're going to focus more on number 2 and number 3, which is you then learn to search and analyze that data. You use operators, which I'm going to show you some advanced operators today. And then eventually you start visualizing and monitoring that data. You put it into alerts, you put them into dashboards, and you can keep an eye on your critical events. You can keep an eye on trends that are going on. So we're going to focus on number 2 and number 3 today. Having said that, a little bit of information about sending data. You can send us just about anything. We can take any structured or unstructured data, and whether it is cloud-to-cloud integration, for example, AWS or Microsoft Azure or GCP, you can send us that data over to Sumo. You can also send us data from things like G Suite or Office 365. You can even send us client-side software data over to us, right? We can grab any of that data, whether it's through an installed collector or a hosted collector, and start indexing it within Sumo itself. The one thing I will say about sending data is that every single message that gets sent to Sumo has these 5 metadata tags. And in particular, the one that I care about is this one called source category, because it's something that can be configured freely. Therefore, we have best practices around it. So your administrators will use the best practices to create these source categories. And you will see it in these labs, how we're using source category to search for our data in just a little bit. So high-level review, or I shouldn't say high-level. A quick review of searching and parsing. This hopefully should be a review for most of you. 95 or 98% of the time, you want to search your data using metadata, meaning one of these 5 fields that I just talked about. Most likely, you're going to be using source category, but yes, you want to search your data using metadata. You want to filter additionally using keywords. Let me show you an example of doing that. I'm going to be switching between the slides and the instance itself. So I'm going to open a new query here. In my case, I'm going to search for actually, before I do that, let me just show you that if I put an underscore in here, let me make this a little bit bigger for you here. If I put an underscore, it is offering the metadata tags. So I could say, pull data from this source host called travel MySQL such and such, right? And I can go and pull all the data for that particular source. Actually, I don't have any data coming in from the source host, but you get the point. I can pull data for a particular source host, for a particular source name, or whatever it is that I want to be pulling from in that case, right? Let's focus on source category for now. So I can say I want data for source category. Let's grab some AWS data just to change here. And you notice how it is auto filtering here. So let's grab some CloudTrail data, right? And I can say run, and that's going to go and grab 15 minutes worth of CloudTrail data. Now I could say only give me CloudTrail data that has the word create route table in it. So I could do it 2 ways. I could click on this and say and add the selected text as and it'll do exactly that. So you notice it just put a little and that in there. Or I could have just typed it myself. I normally like to put all this in one same line. The and is implicit, so I could have done this as well and just say create route table. Or if I didn't want the quotes, I could even simplify this, and it is going to go find all the messages out there that have create route table in there, right? So far, so good, right? So going back to this, you want to always use metadata. You always want to use keywords when you're searching your data, because it's going to help you filter that data quickly. We talked a little bit about Livetail as well. Livetail is the ability, let me grab this and just go and search for it. Livetail gives you the ability to, as the name suggests, tail your logs. So I can run this same query in real time, and it's looking at all my AWS CloudTrail data, and it's going to identify those messages that have the word create route table in it. Not sure why this is not coming back. Let's see, labs Apache access. Oops, access. Let's run that data. There we go. So here's my Lab Apache access data, and I can say I only want those with the word Mozilla in it. And similarly, I can highlight 404s, I can highlight error, I can highlight, I don't know, CPU, whatever you want to do here. This just allows you to highlight some terms as that data is coming through. You can skip over, you can jump all the way to the bottom. But this basically allows you some real-time view into your logs. And by the way, there's a command line interface for this. You download a client, and then you'll be able to run this from your machine as well. All right, let me close this live tail here for now. Again, hopefully this is a review for you guys. You can also start parsing your messages as I probably showed you in previous sessions. Let's say that I wanted to parse out things like AWS region or event source. Well, fortunately for us, this happens to be a JSON message, and guess what? We have a JSON parser. So I could say JSON is the word of the operator, and I can say event name. So in this case, it's going to go out and parse out event name from this thing. And in this case, the event name happens to say create route table. Let's not just grab that. Let's grab all of these. So now I'm parsing event name for all of these, and I can do something like count by event name, because now event name is a field, and I can look at all the different event names in here and count them and see that start logging is the biggest event that I have in my CloudTrail data. Easy enough, right? I'm going to show you something even cooler. Because this is a JSON formatted message, we actually know what JSON looks like. So you can just do a JSON auto. And what Sumo does is it goes and looks at the entire message, including all the trees, all the sub fields here, and it's going to traverse the entire tree, and it's going to parse all the fields in there. So how do I know which fields got parsed? Well, fortunately for me, they're all here on the left-hand side in this field browser. So now I can do something like count by AWS region, because region was one of the fields that got parsed by that, and I can see now my counts by AWS region, and I can see the West is the one with most hits on that front. So the ability to parse your data. If I look at some other type of data, let's see Labs Apache Access. You'll notice that this looks slightly different. The one that I showed you is the ability to grab some of these, one of these messages as an example, and then parse the selected text. So I was able to say something like grab everything between the word get and the word HTTP, extract that and call that my URL. Grab everything after that, extract it and call that my status code, and grab everything after that and call it size, and you get the point. What I'm doing here is I'm using a message as an example so that I can parse it. And the reason I can get away with this is because all Apache Access messages happen to have the exact same format. So therefore, I know that I'm always going to find this kind of format in my messages, and I'm going to be able to parse them this way. So I can click submit. Look what it did. It created the field for me. If I run this query now, it's going to parse out URL, status code, size, refer, and user agent. And there you go. Message is still here on the right-hand side, but I now have user, URL, status code, size, and refer that have been parsed out for me. So this is just a way of parsing the messages. Again, because all my messages happen to be the same format, I can use this we call this parse anchor. But for those of you who have messages that don't look exactly the same, then you can use parse regex. And just briefly, I know that I showed this in level 1, but I'm going to show it one more time. If you go to the Learn tab and you click on Docs, it's going to take you to documentation. I'm just going to open up the parsing operator so that you guys can see what other options are available. If I look at parse operators, I have using regex, JSON, which I just showed you, key value, meaning name equals Mario, company equals Sumo Logic. You get the point. Anything that just has key value formatted logs, CSVs, XMLs, or something else like a tab or a colon. Let me just show you a variable pattern. I like to show this one just because it's pretty, most people understand what the format of an IP address looks like. Most of you have used parse before, so this should be pretty easy to follow. I'm going to go here and to the same query that I had. I'm going to create a new line and drop this in here. And what this is doing is it's looking for a number between 1 and 3 digits, a period, 1 and 3 digits, period, 1 and 3 digits, period, 1 and 3 digits. That sounds like an IP address, right? So I'm going to grab that IP address and I'm going to store it in a new field called IP addresses. And if I run that now, you'll notice that IP address is now another field that has been parsed out for me. So you have options. You have the ability to use parse anchor for those things that always have the same structure, or parse regex for those messages that are going to be a little bit more variable in their structure and in their nature. Now, questions that I usually get around here is, great, this is great parsing, but I don't want to have to remember this or figure this out every time. The good news is that you can create something called the field extraction rule, as the slides here suggest. Field extraction rules allow you to save this parsing so that the parsing happens ahead of time and I don't have to do it anymore. As a matter of fact, let me show you something. I can now, so here it is, something that I can do, count by, I don't know, IP address. I'm just going to take IP address as the field, or a status code, which might be a little more interesting as we create this. So here is my count by status code, because status code happens to be a field that I parsed, right? But let me show you something. I'm going to get rid of this parsing, and I'll show you that this query works. How does it know what status code is if I've never parsed it? Well, the reason for that is because some good old soul actually went here into settings and created a field extraction rule for me already. So let's just grab one of these here as an example. I'm going to click on this and click on edit. And if you notice, actually, this is for a Lab Apache error. Let me grab another one. Let's just grab this one. And if you notice here, someone named Carlos, by the way, this is a training instance, so there's a lot of good stuff here and not so good stuff. So Carlos created an Apache Access rule that says, anything that comes into Sumo that has a Labs Apache Access source category, I want to apply the following parsing expression to it. So the great news about this is that these fields are getting parsed as the data is getting ingested. These fields are getting indexed, and therefore those fields exist right here for me so that I can actually use them. How do you know which fields are there? Well, you can look at the field extraction rule, or if you notice, if I just run a query for Lab Apache Access, you'll see that I have a field browser in here full of fields, status code, IP address, size refer. That is because there's a field extraction rule that already created those. So I can easily know which fields I can use from here, including status code. All right. Another benefit of field extraction rules is the following. Let's say that I wanted to pull only those that have the field extraction rule. I wanted to parse out only those messages with the status code of 404. So normally, I would have to do where status code equals 404, right? Because right above here, I would have to put my parsing statement. Right here, I would have parse something or other. It would go right here. So then I would have to have a where clause right above it. What this means is that it's not as efficient. This captures, let's say, 1,000 messages. Then I parse those 1,000 messages, and then I filter them down to, let's say, only 200 messages that have a 404. Whereas when you have your field extraction rules, you can do the following. You can do and status code equals 404. This is a much better query because this, right off the bat, only brings in those messages that have status code of 404. So I don't have to be bringing a lot of or other messages to then parse them to then filter them. All right. So just the benefits of field extraction rule are immense, not only for you to make it easier, but from a performance perspective as well. So if anything I want you to take from today is make sure you go back and look at your data and start implementing your field extraction rules that are going to make it a lot easier for you to manage this data. Okay, this is where we normally stop, let people try some of the labs. I'm going to skip them for now. Actually, I'm going to show you some options from a parsing perspective. This one's in here fairly quickly, just so that you have a good sense of some of the other things that you can do with parsing. In particular, I'm going to show you this no drop option. So let me grab the results of one of the labs. Let me open a new tab. I'm going to put this, I'm going to do this here, but let me here quickly comment these out for just a second. Okay, let's look at Apache error data. So if you look at Apache error data, it looks like I have a mix of messages. Let's look at this line number 3. This one has a timestamp. Then I have the word error. Then I have a client with an IP address and then some sort of a message. Whereas line number 4, I have a timestamp, I have the word error, then I have something that says modlog SQL, and then I have some sort of message in here. Right? So in reality, these two messages, number 3 and number 4, don't even have the same syntax. What if I wanted the IP address from here? But what if I wanted the warning message from here, right? How do I go about grabbing that stuff from different fields? So one of the things that I can do is I can say, all right, from the first line, look for the word client, and in between those brackets, whatever you find, I want you to grab that as a client IP. Let's not use the Snowdrop for now. Let's just run this query. Pretty straightforward. This is what I showed you before. Grab that IP address and parse it out. Bingo, I've got it. But if you noticed, all other messages that did not have this format got dropped. So if I use the no drop now, what I can do is I can make sure that those other messages don't get dropped. By default, the parse statement drops it. But what we're doing now is we're not dropping those. And of course, I cannot parse the IP address because there is no IP address to parse, but at least those messages don't get dropped. So now I can have a second parse statement that says, okay, look for the modlog SQL comment and then grab anything after that as the message itself. And if I run that query now, you'll notice that some messages have an IP address, whereas other messages have the word message or the client. This is a little confusing. Let's call this, I don't know, MSG, message. So here's the original message, and here's the small message that I'm grabbing from it as well. So you noticed how the no drop in this case can be used as an OR to not drop messages out there. I'm going to show you one last one here from the labs themselves. I'm going to show you one called parse field. This is a great one because this becomes very, very useful. So I'm going to go back in here. Let's just use the same tab. I'm going to get rid of this, put this in here, and I'm going to comment out some of these so that I can show you how we start with this. So what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be looking at our GitHub data. And in GitHub data, I'm looking for the word committer because I want to find out who's been committing changes into our GitHub, right? So there we go. You see that there's committer, there's a lot of messages. There's an email address in here so that I can identify who is the committer for this kind of stuff, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for the word email and then a colon, and then I'm going to parse out anything that is after that, and I'm going to save it as email. So I'm just creating a new field called email. And as you expect, there it is. Here's my field email. Well, what I want to show you is that you could do additional parsing to a field that already exists. So I can now say parse the field called email. And what I want you to do is I want you to grab the beginning and what's after the @ sign, and that's going to be my user, and that's going to be my domain. And so now, if I do that, I can additionally do parsing to that email and grab the domain and grab the user themselves. And now I could even do stuff like, okay, I now only want those where, let's say, where domain equals Sumo Logic, right? .com, right? Or where domain matches. I could have used matches, but I think equal works really well. So now I can search for only those that have sumologic.com domain, and then I could do a now count by user so that I can see who are the users that are doing it, and perhaps I only want the top 5 users. So I can say top 5 users that are doing commits. So there you go. I now have the top users committing into my GitHub repository. Right? So what I wanted to show you here is the ability to do additional parsing to a field that already is parsed. So if you had a field extraction rule that is parsing a field, you can still inline at query time do additional parsing to any of those fields that are available to you. All right, this is good stuff. So hopefully this was a review for you of how to do the parsing and whatnot. Very, very important. Let's talk a little bit about simple analytics. So I also showed you how to do what the query syntax looks like, right? You search with metadata, you search with keywords, then you start parsing your data, or better yet, you have your field extraction rules. You filter that data additionally, and you start aggregating and formatting that data. Right? Here are some of the simple analytics. The usual suspects are in here, right? The counts, the sums, the averages, the if, the matches, a little bit of formatting for that stuff. As a matter of fact, I wanted to point you to, if you go here to the Home tab, and you go to this cheat sheet, this is a great resource that has all the operators for your logs. But the nice thing is that they're broken by function. So here's all the parsing operators, right? There's parse anchor, which I was showing you before. Here is parse regex that I had showed you, key value, CSV, there's that JSON. Here's some of the aggregating operators, average, count. There's tons of them here. Unfortunately, I can't go through all of them. So what I'm trying to do today is show you the ones that are a little more meaningful. But this is just a good place to start because it gives you a good idea with a little bit of an explanation of what it is, a little example. And if you want more detail, you can just click on that and it'll take you to the full-on example of how it works, the syntax, some examples of how to use it and all that good stuff, right? So just remember, cheat sheet is available to you in here. So, what I want to do is just talk a little bit about some of these. As a matter of fact, let me go again and grab an example that might already exist. So let's grab this one here. And I will walk you through it so you can see. Again, I'm just using the same examples that you have on your labs. So when you do the labs, this shouldn't be much of a surprise for you. I'm going to run this query and let's talk a little bit about what this is doing. And then I'm going to come back and we can tweak it if we want to. So in this case, I'm looking for a source category lab Apache Access. I'm saying parse, look for the word HTTP 1.1 and anything after that, grab it as status code. We could actually get rid of this because we have a field extraction rule in place, right? So we can do this same thing because status code is already a field that has been parsed out for me. Then I'm saying if status code matches for something, create a new field called client error that has a 1 if it matches, or a 0 if it doesn't. So in short, what I'm doing is I'm creating a new field called client error that has a whole bunch of 1s and 0s, whether this happens to be a 400 and something or not. And then I do the exact same thing for the 500. If this happens to be a 500 and something, I have something called server error that has a whole bunch of 1s and 0s, right? As a matter of fact, let's hide this field for now. Let's show you what those results look like. So here we go. Here is my message. Here is the status code, which is 200. And it's neither client error nor server error, so I have 0s on both. Let's go find one that might have something other. Here we go. So here's the message. Here's my status code. And since this happens to start with a 400, it sets this to 1 versus a 0. Right? Pretty straightforward. So now I end up with 2 new fields, client error and server error, with a whole bunch of 1s and 0s. If I would want to make this a little more efficient, I could do and status code, status code, and I could do something like equals, and then I could put just the numbers that I care for, right? So if I only care for 404 or whatever, I could filter out the ones that I don't want to make this a little bit more efficient. But for now, let's leave it like that. So now that I have these 2 new fields, what I'm doing here at the bottom is I'm summing all the server errors. So this column, I'm summing them up and saving them as a new field called server error count. And then I'm summing the client errors and summing them as a client error count. And that's what we ended up with in here. Just a count of my server errors versus a count of my client errors. So I just wanted to show you briefly a simple example. This one happens to be using if matches, but you can imagine that you can use any of these other examples in here to start doing the analytics. All right, I kind of rushed through a little bit of that because I want to get to the more advanced use cases here in just a second. But what I would encourage all of you to do is take the time to go through the labs. There's enough labs in here showing you the different operators, the if, the matches, filtering, the where. I think the labs themselves will go a long way for you to be able to do this. I'm going to do one last one, which is the geo lookup. This is always a winner, a favorite of people, because it shows graphically, it shows, or visually, it plots stuff on a map that is a very nice one to demo. So let me show you this example number 6. So I'm going to go back in here, open lab number 6, which is how to plot on a map, whether it is where you're getting your hits from, or whatever you want, where people are logging into your environment from. Whatever the case might be, it's just the functionality of how to plot things is pretty easy. So let me go in here. I'm going to create a new log search. I'm just going to drop this, and let's see what this is doing, right? The first thing that it's doing is it's saying lab Apache access. I want to parse out the client IP. Again, remember, I probably don't need to do this. Actually, hold on a second. Let me talk about this. I probably don't need to parse out the IP address because I have a field extraction rule in place. I just need to remember that whatever I call this variable is the same name that that my field extraction rule is calling it. So I'm going to venture to say that it's probably not client IP. See, look at this. Cannot look up IP client IP because probably client IP doesn't work. I think the field is called IP address. Right? I remember this from having looked at other ones. So what I'm doing now is I'm using the lookup operator. And the lookup operator allows me to look for things like latitude and longitude from a free service that we provide to you called geolocation. So let's take a look at the documentation for this so that we have a better idea on this kind of stuff. So let's look at geolookup here for us. Geolookup, just so I can show you what this looks like. So geolookup allows me to pull things like, well, for one, it'll allow me to plot something like this. But look, it allows me to pull latitude, longitude, country code, country name, region, and all that stuff. As a matter of fact, let's go grab all these other ones as well. Let's grab these and let's put them into our query. So instead of just grabbing latitude and longitude, let's grab all these and let's count by those. So there we go. So here's my query now. By IP address, of course, you need IP addresses that are public IP addresses. If you have only private IP addresses, then this lookup is not going to work because we're not going to know where those the values of those IP addresses. So here, there's latitude, longitude, country code, name, region, and if I plot this on a map, it looks something like that. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you can see the whole map. There you go. Here's my map just plotted with everything in there. And if you wanted to do something like, let's say, focus just on the country code equals US, I think you can imagine from here, you can figure it out that you can easily do something like put a where clause, where country code equals, and then you just put the country code you're looking for. That should hopefully bring back only those for the US, as you see here. And if you map that, you would expect that the map focuses in US only. There you go. Right? Okay. I don't see any questions, so let me continue with some of these in here. All right. So like I said, I will highly encourage that you try these labs. That this is going to give you even more knowledge of how to use these. You'll see how they're used, some of the limitations, some of the use cases for a lot of these. But what I really wanted to get to today was some of these other advanced analytics, the ability to use some of these other operators to take this further. So let's start with Outlier. Outlier allows you to look at historical data and be able to use that in order to identify anomalies or outliers. Let me go into my instance here, and I'm going to cheat a little bit. I have already created a few queries, and I'm just going to open those up and show you some queries using that. All right, so let's start with Outlier here. By the way, should I be closing some of these so that I can make it a little easier for you? Let me do just that. What are these queries? Yeah, let's just close some of these. Okay, let's take outliers. So let me run it first and show you what it looks like, and then come back and explain. So I'm looking only for Lab Apache Access data that has a status code of 404. Pretty straightforward, right? Then I time slice it, and then I count every message as server error count. So far up to here, let me run this query. It's pretty similar to what you've seen before. By the way, I haven't talked about time slice today, but basically time slice allows me to take those 60 minutes and break them into 1-minute buckets. So I should have 60 buckets of time with a count of status code 404 at that particular 1-minute time slice. Yeah, pretty straightforward, because I'm counting these server error counts by time slice. Okay. Well, what I would want to do is I want to find out if there is any big spikes in these server error counts. So what I can do is I can plot, actually, before I do that here, sorry about that, I can grab this and I can plot it on a line. And I can see that this is what it looks like. I have a few ups and downs, not too many outliers. Maybe this might be a little bit of an outlier, or these might be a little bit of an outlier, but for the most part, they look pretty decent, right? But what I can do now is, instead of me eyeballing this stuff, I can say, listen, I want you to calculate 2 standard deviations for me. And that's what this is all about. If I put 2 standard deviations, do I have outliers out there? So let me run this query now using the outlier operator. And what it does is it again plots that dark blue line is plotting the actual content itself, the number of errors that I've had, but the pink triangles are denoting areas where I happen to be outside of these 2 standard deviations that I selected. So this is just showing me visually, very easily, what is outside of the standard deviation. If I were to change this to 3, as you would expect, I would get less pink triangles because my standard deviation is bigger, and I have only 3 data points that are outside of my standard deviation. Let's change this back to 2 to have a little more data in here. What does direction mean? Direction means, do I want to show the ones above and the ones below? And I can change this by just doing a plus, or just doing a minus, or doing a plus minus to show me both if I wanted to. Consecutive means, do I show you every single outlier, or should I expect to have at least 2 consecutive outliers before I show you, before I flag them for you? So that's what consecutive means. And window is a very important one. If you think of this, the way to figure out what your standard deviation is you want to look at your historical data, right? So this is saying, how much historical data should I look at before I tell you what the standard deviation is? So if I say 5, that means that for this data point here, I had to look back at the previous 5 data points, meaning this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one, and use those 5 data points to calculate what the standard deviation is going to be now. So it's looking at historical data to be able to identify what an outlier happens to be. All right. Later on, when we talk about alerts, I'm going to show you that these pink triangles happen to be easily shown as a violation in here. So we're going to be using this number 1 in here, which happens to be a violation, to create alerts. So outlier is a great, easy way to create alerts. All right, let's talk a little bit about predict, which is the other operator I wanted to show you. Predict, as the name suggests, allows me to see what's coming for me. So in this case, I'm doing source categories Lab Apache Access. Let's say that I want to find out what the load of those web servers is going to look like for the rest of the day. So I can do a time slice. In this case, I'm doing a 5-minute time slice. So I grab 3 hours worth of data, and I'm looking at 5-minute time slices, and then I'm doing a count of all the messages. I'm just calling them requests, but basically I'm counting all the messages, renaming them requests, and I'm counting them by time slice. So what this is showing me all the way up to here, let me just hide this. All the way up to here is just showing me the count of messages that I have per time slice. Pretty straightforward, right? And I could even draw that on a line, and it looks like the line is looking like this. What predict allows me to do is look at those previous messages, what, oh, I didn't hit return. Look at those previous messages and then forecast the next 10 data points. So look at all that data, and according to that data, forecast 10 data points into the future so that I can start identifying. So in this particular case, it's kind of hard to see, but it looks like my volume of requests is increasing. So if I see that that increase is at a very steady pace, then I would be concerned about provisioning, and I would have to go figure out how I'm going to handle the requests for the rest of the day. Or let's say that this was a queue and I'm seeing tickets getting taken off a queue. I can predict when that queue is going to get to 0, and I'm going to be done with all the tickets in that queue. So predict, just another operator that is pretty helpful for you out there. Let's look at another one in here, log reduce. For those of you who looked at the demo before, you saw that log reduce was a very powerful tool. I'm looking at snort data. Snort is network intrusion data. And what this is showing me is, let's say that I was a network engineer. I'm looking at logs and trying to identify what has happened in my environment, right? So let me get rid of this here. So if you look at this data, it's telling me that there's a web application attack, there's some sensitive data, there's an attempted information leak. So the thing is, if I'm a network engineer and I know what I'm looking for, let's say that I'm looking for a Trojan horse, I could type the word Trojan, and it's going to go out and it's going to find all the messages that have the word Trojan is in there. Or if I'm looking for the word attack, I can do exactly that. I can enter the word attack and go find any messages that have that. But as you would expect, there's going to be new threats to my data that I might not know how to search for them, right? So what I can do is I can run log reduce on this data. Let me actually just run the query with nothing. So notice I have 58 pages worth of data, about 1,000 messages or 1,500 messages, 58 pages. If I hit log reduce, what I'm asking Sumo to do is to go out and find to catalog all that data into signatures. So it came back and look, I'm still looking at those same 1,400 messages, but now I only have one page to sift through, because what it did is it said, all right, Mario, it looks like about 700 of those messages, so about half of those messages, all have this same format. Of course, the IP address might be different or the date is going to be different, but everything else looks very similar. So that's already half of the messages I don't have to look through or sift through. A lot of the other messages, about 79 of those messages, have this SSH version map attempt, right? And they all look like this. They have a different priority, maybe a different port, but everything else looks very similar. So what this allows you to do is to all of a sudden bubble up those things that are not happening that often. So here, potentially bad traffic, so on and so forth. So I can go and look. Let's say that this had only happened once and I had a little 1 over here. I can click on that value, look at that particular message. In this case, it's 5 messages, but I could look at that particular message and then try to see what that thread is all about. And I could even take it further. I can say, listen, for that host, I want to go and look at the 5 minutes before and the 5 minutes after. Or I could have done it even for that entire source category. Let me go look at the 1 minute before and the 1 minute after. And that is going to give me the context of the message. That is going to show me who logged in right before. So here's the message itself, which is highlighted in light blue, but I can go see the minute right before it to find out what was going on in my environment right before I had that breach or I had that attack or I had that thing happen. So log reduce, again, an incredibly powerful tool that allows you to categorize here. Where is it? Here. That allows you to categorize your signature, your messages into signatures so that you can easily read through them. The other one that I wanted to show you is this one called log compare. So let's look at this data. Again, I'm going to use the same security snort data. And what log compare, which is here, by the way, by default, log compare uses 24 hours. So let's try that. I'm going to just click on log compare. And you notice that what log compare is doing, it's funny, just put this here at the bottom. Let me just grab it and move it to the top. Here we go. Yeah, and I'm going to get rid of this other line, which is doing the exact same thing, right? that I had commented out. So what log compare is doing here is it's running two log reduces. It ran a log reduce now for the last 15 minutes, and then it ran a log reduce 24 hours ago for 15 minutes, but 24 hours ago. And then it took out all the signatures from now and the signatures from the past, and it compared them, and it came back and it said, okay, Mario, it looks like this message here, this signature, this time happened 170 times. That is a 25% jump from where it happened 24 hours ago. And similarly, let's see if I have any other interesting ones. I don't have, let's grab a larger period of time. How about 60 minutes? Let's rerun it with 60 minutes this time. But essentially, it's comparing signatures from the present to pick signatures from 24 hours ago and telling me if something is happening more or less now. It's just giving me trends. Here's two interesting ones. This one is saying, listen, this is a signature that I see now. As a matter of fact, I see one of them that is brand new. This signature was not happening before. So if I'm the security engineer, I'd be concerned. This seems like a brand new attack that is coming down knocking on my door that I hadn't seen 24 hours ago. Whereas this one here happens to be a signature that was there before, but it's not there anymore. So whatever patch I put in place seems to have taken care of that breach because it's now gone completely. Right? So you can even see what's new, what's gone, and you can see percentage of changes. By the way, I didn't even talk about these different actions that you can do. When you run log reduce or log compare, you can promote signatures, you can demote signatures so that it changes their score and their relevance. You can also edit the signatures themselves. For example, let's say that these messages that were broken by priority, I didn't care to break them by priority. I can edit this thing and I say, you know what? Make priority just a variable. I don't really care for that to be priority 2 or 1. Lump all those messages together, click on update, and now priority is not one of the things. It just lumped a whole bunch of other messages into that priority itself. And I can do the same with this split. I can split messages into more if I wanted to have finer granularity. All right, so log compare and log reduce, incredibly useful. One other thing about log compare, I showed it to you by using the default of 24 hours, but you could use a custom one. Perhaps you want to use, I don't know, minus 45 minutes or whatever the case might be. You can choose it in here. One other thing that I'm going to point out is you also have the ability to, in this case, the base query is looking at lab security snort versus lab security snort, but I could have done dev in here and I could do production in here. Let's say that I replicated my logs in production from prod into dev. I can test my patches with the data by comparing two different targets from baseline to a target query as well. Okay, so I don't see any questions. Again, what I'm going to push you to do is try out the labs. There's nothing like trying out the labs. That's going to show you how to use log compare, log reduce, comparing different time periods, identifying outliers, future trends, and so on. So the labs are going to give you a lot of that knowledge. As a matter of fact, some of the labs are very similar to the demo that I just did on those particular features. I'm going to show you one other feature that is not here necessarily in the slides, but becomes very, very useful for those of you who are using the who are going to be out administrators in here. So let's see if I can borrow an example that might exist already out here. Let's see. Let's see if I have a, okay, here's a good one. Let me grab this. Okay, so check this one out. This one is what we call a query template or a search template. What we do is for anybody who this has been shared with, all they have to do in here is come and enter the country code that they care for, and then they will get their results and they can plot those results. In this case, I'm plotting a map in France. Similarly, they could have gone in here and entered US, and they would have gotten a map of everything in the US. So this is if you remember, this is the same query that we built using that geo lookup operator. But in this particular case, I'm making it super easy. I just have a parameter here that any analyst, without needing to know the language, can put together. Let's find out how this parameter was put together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the query behind it. So the query behind it is source category equals Lab Apache Access. This should look familiar, right? Look up latitude, longitude, country code, country name, region. This is the same query that we put together maybe here, right? Remember this query that we put together? Look up latitude, longitude, and all that good stuff, where country code equals US, and it focuses just on US. That's the exact same query, right? Look up latitude, longitude, where country code equals US. The only difference is here that I've parameterized, or I've made the country code into a parameter. So how do you do that? Let me go back to this query and show you exactly how to do that. What you do is you highlight whatever it is that you want to parameterize or create into a parameter. You notice here, when I highlight this, let me unhighlight it. There's nothing there. As soon as I highlight this thing, it says create a parameter. I can click on that little box, and it's going to turn that into a parameter. I can give it a value name, so I could say country code, for example, country code. I can, country code, here. I can give it a default value if I wanted to. I can make this of a particular data type, so I can say it's a string, it's a number, is anything, so let's make it a string. I can give it a description. Please enter country code in question. And I can even give them an example, i.e. US, UK, actually it would be GB, FR, and you get the point, right? And then I could even set values for the parameters as well. So I could say, I'm going to give you some text entries myself. I want to do a lookup to another field. I want to do some label value pairs as well. Anyway, you could specify here if you want to put some sort of a field. But once you save it, there you go. Here is the query itself, and here is what is going to be shown to users. So I can close this out. I can save it. And as part of the saving this thing, I would want to share it as well with other users. And if you don't remember the sharing, I'll get to that in just a second to show you. But here is the same template that I was. I think I might have made a mistake when I was saving there, but this is the exact same way that this was created, right? Being able to create a parameter so that users can now use this as a search template when they're looking at stuff. So incredibly, incredibly useful. One of the other things that you want to do is you want to share your stuff. So in my case, since I'm an administrator, I have the ability to share this with others. So how do you go about doing that? I'm going to assume that that some of you here are administrators. Let's take a peek at your own folder first. So if I'm in my own personal folder, I can grab, let's say, this dashboard or this query. I can grab this query and I can go and share it. And in this case, I can say, I want to share it with, I want to share it with my entire organization. And everybody in the entire organization is going to get view access. So you can become very specific of what kind of access you're going to provide. I could say, I want the entire organization to have view access, but I want, let's say I'm going to add another user with a different access. I want Caleb to have edit access to it. So this is going to give my entire organization view access, but this person, they're going to get edit access in here. If I share this, if I go back just to show you of who has access to this stuff, you'll see that my entire organization has view, I have manage, and Caleb has edit access to this kind of stuff in here as well, right? So this is how you go about sharing. But let me show you one other thing. If you're an administrator, you actually get to do some content administration as well. So as content administrator, I can see all the content that users have out there. Let's say I can go into David and I can see the stuff that David has decided to share and the content that he has out there. And if I think that this is really good content that makes sense to also share with other users, I can say, well, let's actually, there's a couple of things I can do here. I can decide to share it, or I could even decide to move this content under this admin recommended folder or folder structure. I can, as an administrator, I can create new folders and put this in other stuff. So if you notice, let me exit out of this stuff for just a second. As a mere mortal, not as an administrator, I have, when I can look at my own library and look at my data, but I can look at the entire library, and I have a section here called admin recommended, and there are some folders in there that administrators have decided to share with us. So for example, I can get into security searches, and I can see numerous search examples of things that have to do with security, or I can see get started, or if you had different teams, you had the SRE team, you had the ops team, the dev team, you had the security team, you can create different folders and put different searches that are relevant for the different folks in those different areas. All right, so a lot of content that I've covered for you guys. Let's switch gears here just a little bit, talk a little bit about metrics. Again, I've been talking mostly about logs. Metrics give you a very similar ability. We can bring metrics from 3 different sources. We can bring in your host metrics, your AWS metrics. We can bring in Graphite formatted metrics, and now, as of a couple of weeks ago, there's a beta program in place that allows you to create metrics out of your logs. So your logs can be sending us data, and we can turn those into metrics as well. And I explained to you in level 1 that you can that we have out-of-the-box content. We have in the app catalog, we have these apps that allow you to show content. Let me actually show you some of those. So in the app catalog, which is right here, you have a whole bunch of content already for common sources. So we know, for example, we've seen so many customers look at AWS config data that we have a pretty good idea what are the things that they want to look for. They want to look for configuration trends. They want to look for most frequently modified resource types. They want to look for resource name lookup tables. They want to, we have some dashboards that give you an overview of everything that is there. So we've created apps for a lot of the meaningful things, including for some of the metrics as well. So for example, this that I was showing you here is this stuff in dark in the back is a dashboard out of the metrics, host metrics app that just shows you out of the box without you having to configure anything, what the most of the common values of what you would want to get from your host metrics themselves, right? So keep in mind that with metrics, you could do metric overlay. So you can have a panel that shows you the metrics themselves, but you can overlay the logs on top of them so that you can see how these were put together. And if you haven't seen the demo, I would suggest that you look at the Quick Start webinar or the level 1 webinar. The first 10 minutes show you the demo, and it'll focus on this specifically. So again, I'm not going to run through much of the metrics today, but the labs themselves are going to be very, very meaningful. So if you, not many of you are doing metrics, but I would suggest you try the labs so that you can see what functionality is available. And the labs will walk you through basic analytics with the metrics. How do you start comparing your KPIs at different periods, time periods? How to identify rate of change? And more importantly, how to correlate your logs to your metrics as well. Okay, what I want to get to is starting to monitor your data. I think dashboards are very, very simple to put together. We created some of these in level 1, but just to review, I'm going to quickly walk you through creating dashboards. But what I want to get to is the alerts themselves, because these are the ones that are going to start notifying you. But for now, let's just show you how to create some dashboards. So let me go back in here and look at this example that I have. I'm going to take this beautiful picture in here, and let's say that I wanted to add this to a dashboard. I'm going to add it to an existing dashboard. So what I can do is I can click on Add to Dashboard, and it's going to ask me, okay, what do you want to do? Let's say that I want to call this 404 outliers. and I want to add it. If I want to add it to a brand new dashboard, I just start typing the name and it's going to create a brand new dashboard with that name. But if I want to add it to an existing dashboard, I believe I had one that I created from my session 1, level 1, called Mario Apache Dashboard, and click on Add. What you'll notice is that my new panel is being added here to the bottom of my dashboard in there. So here's panels that I already had. I have a title panel, I have a text panel, I have a couple of panels that I put out there, and my brand new panel just got added here. I can resize it, I can move it, I can change locations and all that good stuff. Let's add one more in here. Let's take this this predict one. I'm gonna do the same thing, add to dashboard, add it to that Mario dashboard. That is in here. Let's just change the name. Like, let's call it request prediction, right? And click on add. And I'm going to be adding this panel to my dashboard as well. There we go. So this is very simple way of creating a couple of new panels to your dashboards. This shouldn't be anything new for you. Hopefully you've created a dashboard by now and you know how to put these together. A couple of things around dashboards that are interesting to know. Let me stop with editing first. You see here something called live mode. What live mode allows me to do is it allows me to not have to run a dashboard every time to refresh, but instead that dashboard is running and that dashboard is getting refreshed automatically every second or two, so that I can display this dashboard in my operations center or up on some monitor, so that I don't so that data is just fresh. So in this particular case, or let's say this one, 60 minutes, minute 61 is going to fall off the chart, minute 1 is going to come into the chart, and I'm always going to be having 60 minutes worth of data. So that's what live mode is all about. Let me go back into editing mode so I can show you a few other things that I can do. I can toggle the themes. I could go from white to dark, for example. I can add title or text panels. These are these examples that are here. This is a text panel. This is a title panel that is in here. I can do delete, star it, full screen. Data access level. This is an interesting one. I can say, whenever you run this dashboard, let them look at this dashboard with the viewer's data access level. So if I have a couple of users who can only view the data, let's say they can only view QA data or development data, then that's what they're going to see when they look at this dashboards. But perhaps one day, or for some particular occasion, I actually want them to be able to see production data as well, just in this dashboard, not access it in the rest of Sumo. I can say, I want them to have my data access level. In that case, they're going to be able to view this particular dashboard as if they were me. Right. A couple of other things that I can do. Well, obviously I can refresh it. I can share it. So remember, sharing is caring. So whenever you can, share your dashboards. I already showed you how to use this feature here. A couple of other things that I didn't talk about is you can also share this dashboard with by providing the URL. This is the URL for the dashboard itself. You can share that dashboard with the filters value applied. You can share the dashboards with the time range that you've tweaked it. You can also share this dashboard outside of your org, meaning I can share it with the world. So anybody who has access to this link actually gets to see this dashboard. Or I can say, well, hold on a second. I don't want to share with the world. I'm going to give you a list of IP addresses that have been whitelisted so that I can share this dashboard with those people as well. So you have quite a lot of granularity here in terms of how and who you want to share these dashboards with. Last but not least, I want to show you the ability to filter. So you can actually add filters to your dashboards so that they can be used as templates for searching as well. So for example, I could say I wanted to add AWS region. So in here, let me make this a little more meaningful. Let's say enter region, right? So just giving it a little nicer look to this. And then I can also specify which panels will be affected by this dashboard. So I could say, I don't want request prediction to be affected, and I don't want Apache status codes to be affected, right? So I click on save, and now anytime someone goes in here and enters a value, let's say AWS West 1, I don't know if that's the actual value or not, but what's going on is the two fields that I had, this one and this one, got affected by this, and I bet you that this is not the actual name of the of the value, so that's why it was showing no data. But there you go. Once I remove it, those panels are back. But you get the point. The idea is you have the ability to create filters, to add filters, to edit filters through this. All right. So dashboard's pretty straightforward, but incredibly powerful. The next thing that I want to show you is alerts. And the reason for that is because creating alerts is super easy, but creating meaningful alerts is where it really becomes interesting. So let me first show you how to create an alert and show you all the possibilities around that. And then I'll talk about creating meaningful alerts. So let me switch over and do this with some examples. Let me close some of these things. As a matter of fact, I'm going to close all of these except the dashboard, so we'll keep that dashboard. Okay, so I'm going to go cheat, and I'm going to open some of these that I already have out here. I thought I did. Let me find out. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe not. Let's see. Get started. Yeah, alerts. Here we go. All right. Let me open alert 1, alert 2, and alert 3. They're all good alerts, but there's good, better, and best in here. So let's start with alert number 1. So alert number 1 is looking for a count of my 404s, and then it time slices, and then it looks at the count of number of 404s by time slice. And then it says, listen, give me, show me anything that has more than 150 404s every minute. So I'm going to make it a little bit higher. Let's say 200. Let's see if I have any data in there. No, I don't. Okay, let me make it a little less, 180. So you notice how I'm trying to find the right static threshold to be able to put to this. So what this is saying is, if I ever have more than 180 404s in a given minute, show me results, right? And this is what I want to be alerted on. If I ever have more than 180 404s in a minute, I want to be alerted. So the way to do this is you save your query, and as part of saving that query, you have the ability to schedule it. When you schedule it, you say, I want to run this every hour, every 2 hours, whatever your time happens to be. You can also create a custom cron time frame. But I'm going to say, let's run it every hour. Let's run that. But when you run, I don't want you to send me an email every time you complete this. I don't want to get an email every hour. I only want to get an email if the following condition is met. So remember that where clause we have there is only going to give us results if I have more than 180. So what I'm going to do is, if my results are 0, I don't want to get an alert. But if my results happen to be greater than 0, then yes, send me an alert, right? So, okay, so the mechanics for creating this is so simple. What kind of alerts can I get? Email. So I would specify the email address. I would specify what the email subject looks like, and then I can decide what I include into the content of that email, right? Pretty straightforward. Other options that I can do here include, let's start from the bottom. Save to index. Save to index allows me to save the results of this query into an index of my own choosing, the name of my choosing. So I could call it errors or 404 errors. So what this is going to do is it's going to create a new index called 404 errors, and the content of that is going to be the results from my queries, from my scheduled searches, so that I can later on go and search those indexes. Right? The other thing that I could do is I could create a webhook, meaning I could create a connection to a webhook that then I can find from here. So for example, here I've created one for Slack. this is the payload that it's expecting, but I could always go and customize that payload. I could call this Sumo Logic Bot, for example. So I'm just editing the payload itself, save it. So what's going to happen is anytime that this condition is met, the message is going to be sent to this webhook connection. This happens to be called a Slack webhook connection. How are these connections created? You have to be an administrator to do it, and I'll show you in a little bit, but basically you go under administration, or I think under managed data, and you're able to create your connections there. All right. The other options you have available is ServiceNow. We have a tight integration with ServiceNow that allows you, for those of you who don't know, ServiceNow is like a ticketing system, like a Jira. It allows Sumo Logic to create a ticket, an incident in ServiceNow. So there's just a tight connection for that. We have to do a little bit of work in the back end. We have documentation exactly for how to do that, but this allows us to open a ticket in ServiceNow itself. And the last one that is here is Script Action, and this is a really powerful one. Script Action allows you to specify a script, so you actually have to create a script. Sumo Logic does not care, does not even know what the script does. All it knows is where is it found. It has to be sitting in a machine where you have a collector. And what is it using? Is it using Python or Ruby or Perl so that it knows how to call it? But the cool thing is, if this condition is met, Sumo Logic can kick off that script of your choosing. That script could be something like, take the results from this query and send them to some downstream system if that's what you wanted to do. So Script Action, again, giving you the ability to kick off a custom script of your choosing. Okay. So there you go. Creating an alert is very simple. I have to show you how to create that webhook connection. So let me do that right now. If you are in here, you can go to Manage Data. Oops, where we go. Manage Data, sorry, into Manage Data Settings. And one of the things that you can do under Settings is you can create connections. And here are the 3 connections that you were seeing in my one: HipChat, Slack, and Mixpanels. How do you create a connection? Pretty straightforward. Click on this little plus sign. Let's say that I want to create a connection to PagerDuty. We just get you started. We know what payload PagerDuty is expecting, so we get you started with a skeleton, and you specify here your URL, any authorized header if you want to. You can test the connection and save it if that's what you want to. If you want to create a connection to something that we don't have here, no worries. You can just click on webhook and you enter your own payload, your own custom payload. The only thing that we've done here is we've got you started. We know what the payload looks for Slack, for Datadog, for PagerDuty, for New Relic. So we're just getting you started. For those of you who might be Azure or AWS shops, you can also kick off a Lambda or an Azure function. So let me give you an example of a customer that we have. This customer is using Sumo for security purposes. And what they do is they're looking for a lot of failed logins. So if they have multiple failed logins, which means someone's probably trying to hack into their environment, they kick off an AWS Lambda function that goes into their network settings and it disables that IP address. It blocks that IP address from any further attempts. So that's a great way of showing you how to use these functions, or in this case a function, or a webhook to be able to take action on some of this stuff. All right, so let's focus back on what is a meaningful alert. So this is a good alert. It actually lets me look at a high count of 404s and be notified about it. But the problem is that you notice how I had to fiddle with finding the right threshold. Was it 150? Was it 190? Was it 180? So I had to kind of try to figure it out in here and try to get to a point that is meaningful for me. And this might be changing over time, so I would have to go in here and change it. A better alert is to be using Outlier. If you remember, Outlier uses historical data. So all the way up to here, I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm counting 404s, and here is this thing. But instead of having a where clause that just looks at 190 or 180 and above, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Outlier and let it tell me when I have something that is out of the norm. So this looks normal, this looks normal, no, all of a sudden I had a spike. Okay, there we go. So now I can be notified of that little pink triangle. How do I do that? Well, if you look at this, count violation is set to 1 for that particular pink triangle. So all I need to do is have a where clause that says, if count violation is ever 1, then let me know. Or if count violation were greater than 0, which is exactly what I have here, where count violation is greater than 0. So this is only going to show me results if I actually have a count violation. If I don't have a count violation, I get no results, therefore no alert. So now the same thing happens, right? You go here, you say schedule the search, you save it, let's say hourly, and in here, same story. Just alert me if the number of results is greater than 0, because if you don't have any pink triangles, you're not going to get any results. Great, pretty straightforward. Okay, let me show you the better type of alert. And let me run it first and just walk you through what it's doing. What I'm doing in this alert is, instead of just looking at my 404s, I'm looking at my 404s in the context of my general traffic. So if my traffic were to increase, then of course my 404s are going to increase. Statistically, it's just going to happen, right? So I don't want to get a lot of false positives. What I want to know is, when do my 404s increase, but my 200s don't increase? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create, let me walk you through this. I time slice it like before, but I'm saying if status code equals, actually, let me simplify this. I try to make it a little fancier just to show you that you can use the matches operator, but I could have done this as well. If status code equals 200, then create a new field called successes that has 1s and 0s. If status code equals 404, then create a new field called fails. Let's just look at that. This is very similar to the lab that we did earlier on today. So this just creates 2 new fields. There's my status code, and it creates 2 new fields, one called fails and one called successes that have a whole bunch of 1s and 0s down the line. So now I sum them up. I say, okay, some successes as success count, some fails as fail count by time slice. And what that does is it gives me a count of successes and a count of fails. Here's where the cool thing comes in. I can now create a new field called failure rate that takes the rate of my fails versus my successes. And now I have a true way of measuring when my successes go up or when my fails go up, but my successes don't, right? So what I can do now is place an outlier on that success, on that failure rate. And that creates something that looks like this. Oof, kind of small to see. So let me just change the axis for this thing. Let's put that at 0.01. Let's put that at 0.1. And now that's better. Okay, so there you go. So now this is looking at rates of increase. So this data point in here, this little pink triangle, is not just saying, oh, you have a lot of 404s. Actually, that pink triangle, what it's saying is, you have a case where your number of 404s increased at a much higher rate than your 200s. So this is definitely a much more meaningful alert than the previous 2. And again, I can do my where clause in here and say where rate violation is greater than 0, and I'm going to get an alert only when I have results. And from now you can do the same thing, right? Schedule this alert, go through the motions in here, and the key thing is, I would say, where this thing happens to be greater than 0. All right? Very cool. So there you go. I just walked you through 3 different types of alerts. They're all okay, but what you want to do is you want to think of things in context. How do I look at something and measure it against the norm, measure it against the context? By the way, I'm going to take advantage of this moment to point you to Community. Community is full of templates like this one that I just showed you. As a matter of fact, let me just show you. Here is Community. Let me do a little search on Outlier, for example. And here are just different examples of people posting how to use that outlier operator for some of the stuff that they've created, right? Oh, look, here is one called Creating Meaningful Alerts. Does that ring a bell? So here is a post that this guy Mario created. It's a really nice guy. But basically, here is the same exact template that I just showed you. And okay, I'm doing it for Apache Access with status codes, but this same exact query could work, let's say, for Windows, and these are event codes, or this could be your own custom logs, and these are just error types or different types of error codes, right? So keep in mind this this community. It really, let me just go back to here and community. It has a lot of information, a lot of posts on on sending data, application integrations, and in particular, the one that I was pointing you to is this one called the query library. There's a ton of queries here that help you figure out how to use a lot of these operators for some of the things that you want to create. So by all means, feel free to use it, post questions, peruse through it. It's a lot of good info in there. All right, so with that said, let me pause here for a second, point you again to the labs. There's a lot of ways, a lot of other examples in there. Here's the Creating Meaningful Alerts, installing apps, creating some of the dashboards that are out there. I won't go through all these use cases, but what I will do is I will show you that all these links actually point you to, let's grab one of these. Let's grab this one. I'm going to click on this one, compare an outlier. Click on this one. They're pointing you to that same community that I was talking about before. Excuse me, this is that same community. So here, Graham, 3 months ago, posted this query on how to compare an alert on historical data, right? So what he's doing here is he's using time compare, the time compare operator, and he is probably going to be using the outlier operator at some point as well, so that he can alert, he can plot that, and then he can alert on those specific things out there, right? So again, I showed you a lot of the basics today, a lot of the basis for this. Putting it all together, here's a really good, here's a really good example of what did I just do? Let's see, give me just 1 second. Oh, I went to the end. Yes, give me just 1 second. I'm having to, oh my, this didn't look as clean as I thought it would, but now you get it. Those are some of the good examples of how to do that stuff with Sumo. I don't know where I lost my, anyway. Oh, this is level 1. That's why I didn't mean to show you that. Here we go. This is what we were looking at. So here is the example of how do you look at some of those use cases. So where do you go from here? The Learn tab has a lot of data available to you. You can create support cases right from that Learn tab. You can look at community, you can look at that cheat sheet, documentation. There's quite a few videos here that are available to you. There are some tutorials for you to try. But probably what you're interested right now is, great, how do I go about getting certified? I'm going to come back to the questions in just a second. The level 2 exam is available. You can literally from your UI, let me just show you here. I'm going to go to the UI and show you that right from here, I can go into certification and take the exam. The exam is 30 questions. It's 60 minutes. Most people take about 30 to 35 minutes to complete. You have 3 attempts for the exam. So if you fail the first one, you still have 2 chances. Most people pass it on the first one. We have a few people that pass it on the second one. Nobody has ever not passed it on 3 attempts. So rest assured that this is not going to be too difficult for you. If you've gone through this webinar and if you've done the hands-on labs, you should be able to pass this exam with no problems. So with that said, let me pause here for just a second and put it out there for questions. Any questions from the audience? And by the way, I'm going to stop the recording right now.